Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. This is season 11, episode 2. I'm very honored and thrilled to be talking with actor, comedian, writer Dan Adhoot. Dan is a national headliner who has frequented guests on The Tonight Show and is currently acting on Netflix's Cobra. He has been on NBC's Bajillion Properties, Showtime Shameless, Comedy Central's Workaholics, and Disney's Kickin. Dan has a diverse writing career as well. He wrote the Lionsgate feature film Public Disturbance and has been previously developed with Fox, CBS, NBC, and Freeform. In this interview, we'll talk about Dan's career, his book, and his love of food. We'll also talk about his podcast, Green Eggs with Dan, where he interviews comedians and food celebrities about their lives and what's in their fridge. I want to take you to my conversation with comedian, author, writer Dan Adhoot right now. Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. Today I'm excited to be interviewing comedian Dan Adhoot. Dan is known for his TV roles like Cobra, The Crew, and Shameless. He's also a stand-up comic who has performed regularly at the Laugh Factory in Los Angeles and all over the country. He's recently written a book called Undercooked, How I Let Food Become My Navigator and How Maybe That's a Dumb Way to Live. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for reading the book. I mean, it's a lot of hours of that you've given me, so thank you.
I loved it, and you left me hungry for more. Now, for our listeners who are not familiar with you, can you tell us where in the country you're from and where you live now?
I'm from New York, and I live in LA right now. So, I've been in LA for about 12 years, and this is home now.
Very nice. I wanted to talk to you about comedy. How did you get into comedy, and where did it begin for you?
It began for me in high school. There was an improv troupe that my high school had, which was very progressive. This was way before Whose Line Is It Anyway or anything like that. So I got into improv. I really loved it. Then that prepared me to do improv in college. I did the improv troupe at Johns Hopkins. And then my senior year, I felt that none of my sketches were we started doing sketch comedy in the group, and none of my sketches were chosen. And I got so annoyed that I was like, I'm just going to do stand-up because I don't have to answer to anybody. So I started doing stand-up mostly just to lash out at my college sketch comedy group. And that's basically how it all got started.
Do you remember your first gig? What was that like for you?
I do. It was in Baltimore, and it was in Baltimore. It was some weird variety show at like a theater, like a community theater. And I was going on second, and the first person who went up was someone who was supposed to do 10 minutes, but ended up doing 30 minutes. And it was a weird sort of avant-garde one-man show about like living in the ghetto with like a crackhead mom and who was a prostitute.
Oh, wow.
And that's not hyperbole, by the way. That was literally it. And and it was like really weird, and they had to end up turning the lights on in the whole place to get him off stage. And then I went on after him and did stand-up comedy, which actually went over kind of well. But that was my first show.
Who were the comedians that you listened to as you were growing up?
I feel like my idols are, I came up in the SNL class of Chris Farley and Adam Sandler. And, those guys are Norm Macdonald, like that crew, was very formative to me. Also, Conan O'Brien was a huge influence on me. And then just stand-up wise, Dave Attell, like I would lie to my parents and say I was going to my friend's house and take the train into the city just to watch Dave Attell perform stand-up when I was in high school. So,
have you ever been up to the Bay Area, up here in San Francisco? You ever play any comedy shows here?
I haven't done comedy clubs though. I've done like a bunch of colleges in the Bay Area, but the crowds are always fantastic up there.
Now, there were no smoothies being made during these performances.
No. So Dean is referring to a part in my book where I talk about doing college comedy shows, and some of them are just absolute utter nightmares where you're performing in the cafeteria and the smoothie machine is on in the background, just punching your jokes in the face. And no, the Bay Area shows have always been respectful and nice.
I've seen you on a lot of different shows over the years. I liked you on Shameless. I thought they could kind of have done more with your character on there. Would have been nice to see your character a little bit more, I think, on Shameless. And then
Yeah,
also,
thank you. I appreciate that. I did have a humongous prosthetic penis in it, which a lot of people didn't know it was a prosthetic, and they were disappointed when we'd hook up.
You play Anoush on the hit television series Cobra Kai, which is one of my favorite TV shows on television. My wife and I binge it whenever it's on. I often think your character is the only sane person on the television show. Has that ever been something that's come up in the script writing?
It's pretty funny. I've never thought of it like that, but yeah, Anoush is definitely the only voice of reason of like, what the hell are all you people doing? Like, act like adults. Why are you doing karate? But yeah, I mean, and for all the Cobra Kai heads out there, I always say, if it wasn't for Anoush alerting LaRusso Otto of Cole's hostile takeover, all of this show would be over. Cobra Kai would be no longer a thing. But I saved LaRusso Otto, and I don't think that I get enough credit for it.
I just keep wondering if your character's be walking around with like a salad bowl full of sedatives and like telling everybody, calm the hell down, calm down.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a bad idea. There is a writer's strike, Dean, so we're looking for ideas from anyone right now.
Okay, I'll put my bid in. Now this show started on YouTube. Back when this started, do you guys know it was going to be the big hit? It was, I mean, because it was, I think, very big on YouTube. But did you guys know it was going to just have this gigantic hit on Netflix that it did?
I don't think anyone had. Well, you ask the creators, they'll say yes, they knew that it was going to happen. But I had no idea. I did it essentially as a favor to the creators because I'm buddies with them, and the budget was really low because it was a YouTube show, and they were like, just do us this solid and do an episode or two. And I was like, all right, cool. Little did I know that it would be like the acting gig that gets me, that I get recognized from all over the world. I was actually just in Israel doing a bunch of stand-up shows, and I was recognized by Jews and Arabs for Cobra Kai. So I feel like I am the key to Middle East peace, all because of a show that started on YouTube.
Bringing them all together.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed your book, Undercooked. And while I knew it was going to be a comedic book and it would be funny, I found much of it to be very relevant and poignant. I really like the writing, and I just want to ask you: had you always wanted to be a writer? Is this something that you had pursued through your life?
Not at all, Dean. I always say, like, I kind of fell into being an author. Like, it was never a dream of mine. It was never a thing that I wanted to do. I've always written for TV here and there, but never anything like this. But how it happened was I did an episode of Steve Rinella's podcast, Meat Eater, which is like the number one hunting podcast in the country.
Yeah.
And I told these stories about my buddy Mo, who's my hunting partner, who is an Arab Muslim guy, and I'm an Iranian Jewish guy, and they just really were taken by these stories. And my manager listened to the episode, and she was like, you should write a movie about you and your friend Mo, like a buddy comedy. So I tried to outline a film, and the outline didn't really go anywhere. And she was like, as an exercise, why don't you just write down why you love food so much? And I was like, I love food because it's delicious. She's like, no, you love food more than most people do. Like, you just flew out to Montana to do this podcast about hunting because you love food so much. And so I wrote just like free writing, which is like what kind of became the first chapter of the book, which was about my relationship with my father growing up, and how after my older brother died, I turned to food, he turned to God, and I turned to food. And she was like, this is cool, but I feel like this feels more like a chapter of a book than a movie. So, can you stretch this? Can you write 2 other chapters? And I was like, let me give it a shot. So I wrote 2 other what I thought were chapters, and she looked at it and was like, "These are really good." And I was like, "Really?" And she pitched it to the lit agent in the lit agency that I'm repped for TV stuff. And the lit agent, Liz Parker, called me and was like, "I get comedians who want to write books. I get their pieces, their samples all the time, and 99% of them suck. And this doesn't suck." I was like, "Really?" And honestly, it just like kind of snowballed like that. And then within a month, we got a pitch together and pitched these publishers, and there was a bidding war. And next thing I knew, I had a year to write a book contractually. So it came out of nowhere, Dean. And I'm telling you, I never planned on this being a thing. But it worked out.
Yeah. I really thought this book was unique in that, like many comedians will write books and, they'll be okay, but, they won't be something I'll really want to read again. But you wrote a book, and this is your first book, and, I found a lot of it to be really relevant, a lot of it to be very poignant, as well as funny. And I think because there's a lot of heart in it, there's a lot of you in it, and I really liked it. But it had some really standout and surprising chapters. I want to talk about chapter 2. One of them talks about your experiences as a hunter. When did you first decide you wanted to hunt, and what was your first hunt?
So I did not get into hunting because of how most people get into hunting, which is that their dad hunted and their father before them hunted. No, I'm the first in my family in any generation to go hunting. I think, which sounds funny because I feel like first generation Americans are always like, I'm the first one in my family to go to college. I'm like, I'm the first one in my family to kill an elk. So I got into it basically because I became addicted to being like a foodie and to getting really good at that game of being a foodie. And I was like, well, there's no ingredient that is more special or local or free range than, an animal that you kill yourself. And I started getting into all the ethics of, hunting your own food and stuff like that. So I didn't get into it because I wanted to. In fact, I really didn't want to. And if you read in the book, like my first experience of hunting was completely traumatizing. But I got into it because I felt like I had to, and it was kind of like a calling in a weird way. And I kind of, I hated it at first, but I stuck with it, and now I absolutely love hunting. I think it's a really interesting pastime. I think it challenges you mentally and physically, and I'm a totally converted non-hunter to hunter.
I mean, I really get a lot of there's almost like you talk about hunting in many ways, like there's like a spiritual quality here for you. Now, you talked about, I think, your first hunt. What was your first hunt where you kind of felt more comfortable with it? Let me ask you, what was your first deer or elk like that you bagged? How was that for you?
My first deer was actually a lot easier than the first time I went hunting, which was for duck, which sounds crazy. Like you would think that a deer hurts a lot more than a duck, but luckily, I mean, the duck that I shot on my first hunt, I just injured it, and then I had to like go and kill it, and it was really awful. But the deer that I killed, it was quick, one shot, and it was down, which was nice, thank God. But I had gotten used to killing by then because I think I went duck hunting. After that, I went goose hunting. After that, I went pheasant hunting. So it all gets easier each time. And then by the time I went deer hunting, it was it I was pretty used to the whole thing. I mean, there's so many, it's such a sensory overload for people who are not used to that lifestyle, right? There's blood, there's the smell of gunpowder, there's guns, there's all these laws and permits and stuff that you're not used to. So it's a real weird world to get into if you didn't grow up around it. And
for me, it's normal. I'm used to it. So I remember being around it all the time. I mean, seeing camo everywhere and seeing the guns and everything is, to me, second nature.
Where did you grow up, Dean?
So my family moved up to Idaho and Washington. So we lived around, especially in Idaho, we lived around a lot of hunters. I mean, I feel like every neighbor was a hunter there.
Yeah, so I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood in Long Island. I never knew a hunter until I went to college. I never saw deer on the once in a blue moon we'd see deer on their roof of a car, and it was like completely just would shake us to our core. Um yeah, I mean, look, once I started to get used to it, once I started to cook the ingredients and really love the way that they tasted and felt like I earned it in a way. I don't know. I really fell for it. And also just being out in the outdoors and shutting down. It has that wonderful effect on the brain. And I write in the book, and I know a lot of people are probably listening to this saying, well, I'm a hiker. What's the difference? Like I go out and get, my fill of nature. But I'm a hiker as well. I love hiking, but there's a huge difference between hiking, which is being an observer in nature, and hunting, which is being a participant in nature. And it's two completely different worlds, and they both have their merits, but there's something truly uncomfortable about being a hunter that ultimately makes it, I think, more rewarding in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I just figure, I mean, we're all going to die. Everything dies, humans and animals alike. And I think for animals that are out in the wild, they die pretty nasty ways sometimes. Sometimes I think the bullet is probably a more humane way to die rather than getting ravaged and ripped apart by something.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think hunting is one of those things where most people have such strong opinions about it, and you can kind of take apart most of their arguments with a couple of sentences.
Yeah.
It's so easy to argue for hunting, in my opinion, to anyone, no matter how. And I live in Los Angeles, I'm a coastal elite. I often have to defend my hunting bona fides. And it's usually pretty easy to take that wall down, because I just think people have such preconceived notions of hunters and hunting and the cruelty of it. And they see a picture of a dude posing next to a lion, and they think every hunter is that type of hunter. And
Yeah.
But once you start breaking down, oh well, all the money for that goes into your hunting license goes into conservation, and that totals more money than almost every conservation group combined. So hunters are actually giving more to conservation than anyone else. And that point that you just made, that like, what's worse, like being an elk that dies from a bullet, like a shot through the heart and lungs, or it being pulled apart by wolves, like while it's alive.
Yeah, it's not dying by old age. It's not going to go to a little old deer's home. It's going to have a pretty bad end at some point.
Yeah, and probably not soon, or probably soon after you would have killed it, right? Because
right.
you're usually going for mature animals as is. Like no one's going and shooting Bambi. It's like Bambi's dad was gonna go soon anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Preparing game, I found it to have a learning curve as far as like cooking it. And I know that you do cook, so was there a learning curve for you preparing some game meats? I know like plucking things can be really a chore, and like preparing big pieces of meat and breaking it down, that's a lot of work. Was that kind of a learning curve for you?
Yeah, I mean, and I definitely nerded out on the butchery of it all, and like the traditions of like hanging game birds in England, for example. Like they'll just like hang game birds for like weeks at a time outside as long as it's cold, and to tenderize the meat, sort of like a way of dry aging with the guts intact. So like every culture has their own way of preparing the meats, and also like when they kill the animal, what size of animal they get. Which, it's funny, I was just on Steve Rinello's podcast last week, and I was arguing about how in a way, hunters, as rednecky as everyone thinks they are, and in a lot of ways they are, the most rednecky hunter is more of a foodie than most foodies, because they know things about food, like, oh, if you kill a duck that is feeding mostly in rice paddies versus a duck that's feeding mostly on fish, it's going to have this type of flavor versus another type of flavor, like real granular stuff on on how meat tastes with certain feeds or certain times of the year that you harvest them, that I think are way more advanced foodie, facts than someone who goes to the best restaurants would know. Like, and more interesting, I think. But in terms of cooking it, for me, yeah, I mean, look, game meat is super unforgiving in that you have to cook it perfectly and you need to cook it to the right temperature, or it's going to taste livery and awful if it's overcooked. And I think that it's not where the title of my book Undercooked comes from, by the way. But yeah, I think game meat typically has way less fat than any type of farmed meat, so you can't it needs to be served rare most of the time, right? Unless you're making a stew out of it. So yeah, very, very important to get that right. It's not forgiving whatsoever. But that's also, I think, what makes it really special. You got to get it right.
And it's so good. I mean, it's so damn good. Venison is just amazing, and I just love it so much.
Yeah, it's delicious.
I would have it more often if I could.
It is. It's very delicious, and there's something kind of cool about the fact that we're so used to eating foods that are not wild. It seems like fish is the only wild food that we can still kind of get on a regular basis. But in terms of wild meats, it's like a real rare delicacy, and the wild stuff tastes a lot different from the farm stuff, even with venison or elk or within those animals. So I don't know, it's just like real, I love nerding out on that stuff. I think it's really interesting. And
me too.
Yeah, it's so I try to talk about it a lot in the book because I know that a lot of non-hunters are reading my book, and I want to change their minds around their perceptions around hunting.
I really loved that you wrote about it, and I love what you had to say, and I just loved hearing about the experiences that you had in the book with hunting, because I really thought that you added a lot of like really good, solid content about it that was, I thought, really credible and wasn't kind of pandering. A lot of the stuff, like there's what I call the hunting channel that my parents always watched, and there seems to always being an agenda there, and I didn't feel like there was agenda with you. You're just writing about hunting, which is nice. I don't always see that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I hate that, exactly what you're talking about, that agenda. Like, you watch the hunting channel, everything has heavy metal behind it, and it's like, gurney's ammo. It's like, you want to fucking kill that animal? Use our ammo. It's like so gross and broy, and I think actually it does a real disservice to the hunting community. But yeah, I mean, look, I think I have an interesting kind of way into it because I'm an outsider looking in, right? So for me, again, it's not like I didn't get into it because I enjoyed hunting. I got into it because I felt like I should get into hunting. So I don't know. I think I'm with you though. I hate that agenda driven hunting content. It drives me crazy.
I really enjoyed Chapter 8, Cream and Tatar. It reminded me of when I was young and my mother got me a French cookbook and I learned to cook from it. Can you talk to our listeners a little bit about this chapter and when you were young you used to make souffles?
Yeah, that chapter is fun because it's kind of a palate cleanser between chapters. It's like just it's a chapter that starts off really innocent and then ends up going off the rails a little bit. But it's the smallest chapter in the book, and it's like, I think, in between two very intense chapters. So I love that chapter. It's a little bit of a sorbet palate cleanser. But yeah, I grew up fascinated with cooking, and souffles were something that my mom and I got into together, and we would cook them together, and it just seemed like such a fun science experiment. Because when you're a kid, braising something isn't exciting because you can't see it happening. It's like, but making a souffle is like magic. It's literally like, it's like Frankenstein. It's like it's alive. You're like watching it rise in the oven, and it's awesome, and it tastes great. And also just like whipping the egg whites into stiff peaks also is like, feels like you're doing magic. Feels like, whoever thought that egg whites would do that, right? So I don't know. I loved and was always fascinated with making souffles. I still love making souffles, and that was like the first thing that kind of got me really into cooking. And if anyone's listening and they're trying to get their kids into cooking, try. I know it sounds intimidating, but if you follow the directions, you can make it happen. But cooking souffles, I think, is super fun and got me very, very into cooking. And then the chapter takes a dark turn where I where there's a whole cocaine aspect to the cream of tartar, which again, yeah, just read the book, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it works pretty well.
I want to talk to you about Chapter 9, Chasing Deer. I thought this was an exceptionally good chapter, and as a man, I really resonated with it. Have you had a lot of feedback from it now that the book has been out for a few months and people have had a chance to read it?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have brought it up. It was a chapter about my ex and how she had food allergies, celiac disease, and gluten-free, and all that jazz, and how it kind of ended up ruining our relationship, which again gets to the subtitle of the book, how, like, you know, food becoming your life navigator is kind of a dumb way to live, because that's exactly what I did in that relationship, and it led me astray, because she was a wonderful person, and that all that I saw was the food allergy. And so, yeah, I mean, then I tie it all into coos deer hunting, which is a really interesting hunt where you're going after one of the smallest deer in North America, and they minimize themselves, and they've bred themselves small to minimize themselves to predators. And I kind of tied that into, that's kind of the position I put my ex in, to minimize herself, because I just couldn't stop focusing on this quote unquote defect as I saw it. Yeah, that was an intense chapter. I did not enjoy writing that chapter, I'll tell you that. I really hated writing that chapter.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that, but God, it was, I mean, so it gave me a ton, like, I started thinking about it at 2 o'clock in the morning and thinking about how I've done some of that stuff in my life. And because it's, it wasn't about the food, right? It was, an issue that you'd had, like, taking the baggage into something. And I think that, I mean, I can think everybody does that on a certain level, right? That's like a really common human thing.
Yeah. For sure. And I'm not proud of it, again, it was like, it's funny because I wrote that chapter when it was like, I left that for the end because I just didn't want to get into it. And then, like, my deadline was fast approaching, so I just kind of had to rush through it, which made it a little bit easier to do. Yeah, I mean, that's why I think this book is resonating with people, is because I just I put it all out there. I know it sounds cliche, but, like, I really did kind of dig deep and leave. I always say I don't come off looking great in this book. Everyone else does, but I don't paint myself, I don't think, in a very flattering light, which I think is probably what separates this book from other, like, quote unquote celebrity written books, like, but people are resonating with it, thankfully, which I'm very happy for, because that would suck if I, like, put all my deepest, darkest secrets in a book and then everyone was like, this sucks, this guy's an asshole.
I really thought there was some good insights in this book, and I really recommend it for others. A lot of this, I really felt like it was leaving me hungry for more. I felt like Oliver Twist saying, "More, please, more." Have you thought about making another book?
I am. I mean, I love this. I love writing because, everything else that I do is kind of the opposite. And what I mean by that is, with stand-up comedy or with writing for TV and stuff like that, the drama is in the background, and you take that drama and turn it into comedy. And so it's almost, let's call it a 90% comedy, 10% of the drama. And I think here the formula is kind of flipped on its head, where it's like the dramatic stuff leads the way, and then I make that funny. So there's something really cool about having that outlet, as well as, like, just being able to run to the comedy club, do 15 minutes and get your laughs and leave. This to me feels like way more like in the weeds, and I kind of like that. I mean, My goal is to be the David Sedaris of like food writing. So if
Yeah.
I can just keep cranking out these books and coming up with funny stories regarding food, then, you know, I would love to do it for as long as I can.
The one comedian actor you reminded me of the most with this book was Steve Martin. I don't know if you've read Steve Martin's books, but he's very funny, of course. He makes me laugh, he kills me. But he's written some stuff that's so deep and insightful. I thought, wow, you got to kind of flex a part of yourself that people probably wouldn't normally see. Was that daunting for you as a comedic actor to kind of put something out there that was really serious and kind of insightful?
Yes, it was. And mostly because I'm used to stand-up, which is such instant gratification. Like, right away if something's working or not, if people are laughing or not. With this, it's like you're spending a year and change writing something. You've had a couple of people giving you feedback, but you have no idea how the hell it's going to be received. And then one day it's just out there and it's out there forever. And now it's like, if it's a bomb, it'll bomb forever. And so yeah, it's definitely I felt a lot more unnerved about this than anything else I've ever done in terms of like how it's going to be received and whatnot.
Do you have any advice for people that might be having struggling with their kind of psychological relationship with food, just from your own personal experience in this regard?
Look, my psychological experience with food is different from most people's. I think most people, when they think I have a problem with food, it's like I eat too much of it or I eat too little of it. And for me, it was just I became addicted to that high of like finding the cool restaurant and finding the best dish and telling everyone about it. And unfortunately, because of Instagram, now it seems like everyone has that same exact affliction, right? Like, when's the last time you went out to a restaurant and people weren't snapping photos of their food? And look, I'm guilty of it as well. Like, I'm not going to say that I'm not, but it's like,
me too.
It's definitely like you get to the point where I have a lot of friends who are very famous food bloggers, and I go out to eat with them, and it's the fucking worst. It's like miserable. Like, you're sitting there, they have lighting, and they're like making these faces as they eat. And like, I'm like, you've taken all the enjoyment out of eating. So it's like, I've pulled back on that type of post because it's like I don't want that to happen, and that's what everyone's doing is they're taking the enjoyment out, and it's just becoming a game now. And it's so awful that you're seeing restaurants changing the way that they're being because of this too, right? Like a lot of restaurants you'll notice have the lights are on a little brighter, and that's so that the food comes out better in photos, and it's like. That is such a gross, awful thing. And I just think ultimately it's going to leave us all empty. So I highly recommend put the phone away. At the very least, do not use a flash in the restaurant. Let's start there. #NoFlash. That is my campaign. Just stop taking flash photos of food in restaurants because it ruins the mood for everyone. So I just feel like we need to get back to just really enjoying restaurants for what they are, and which is a nice meal and also nice people who work there, and making it less about just like, I need a new place. I need the best place. I need to go down the list of what Eater says is the best restaurants. I mean, find what you love and stick with it is kind of like where I end up,
I want to talk about your podcast, Green Eggs and Dan. First off, I'm a huge fan of the podcast. It really meant a lot to me as I was dealing with my father's death and traveling a lot on long car trips. I binge listened to the whole thing, and I really became a huge fan of it. And there's some great, really wonderful standout episodes. Do you want to talk about the podcast a little bit and how you got to do it?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. I'm glad that it could help you in that tough time. And I love the podcast. It was just such a passion project for me. And I'm a huge fan of passion projects. Like if you're doing something not because of the money, that's usually where the money is going to end up coming. So for me, I've always loved food and comedy, but I always kept them separate. But this was the first time where I was like, what happens if I combine them both and do a comedic food podcast? And I pitched it around everywhere in LA to all the big podcast networks, and they all said, no, there's no market for this. And I ended up going with a small network, and we started churning out episodes, and it became the #1 food podcast in the country very quickly.
Yeah.
And it's become so much fun for me because I'm, I live in LA, I'm in entertainment, I see celebrities a lot, and I'm always like, I never know how to speak to them. I always get nervous. But the thing that I know how to speak to is food, and I could talk food to anyone. So I was just like, why don't I use that crutch that I have and turn that into a show? And so, I thought of this little gimmick, which is every celebrity sends a picture of the inside of their fridge. People can see them on my Instagram, and we just talk about food. Like I tell them before we start, I'm like, I don't care about your career. You can talk about your career on any other podcast. Like, I couldn't give a shit. And honestly, they love it because they're used to going on podcasts and just talking about their career. So for them, it's like, it's exciting to, like, Taylor Mishak, who's one of the stars of the show Dave, like, she was like such a huge food nerd. And she was like, this is so fun. I never get to talk about this. And so I don't know. I think that everyone has a relationship to food, right? Even if their relationship to food is that they don't have a relationship to food, it's a relationship to food. So I don't know. I just love, it's just a wonderful way to connect with people in a way that I normally wouldn't. And the episodes are fun and funny. And my favorite part also is the little historical bites that I throw in. Usually I'll find a part of our episode and do a little deep dive on it. And it's just really fun to learn about weird food history and about people's weird food histories. And I don't know, I'm glad you love it because I'd love it too. And it's just become my favorite thing that I do.
You've had some great guests on the show. I mean, you've had a lot of really great guests in the show, but you've had a few people that really wowed me. Padma Lakshmi and Jacques Pepin. I mean, how was that to talk to them?
Oh my God. That's the thing. I'm not starstruck by famous people. I'm starstruck by famous chefs or food personalities. And those two were like, Jacques Pepin, I couldn't contain myself. I was so excited that I was talking to this man, and he was so charming and fun, and was like telling stories about how he and Julia Childs would get wasted in between takes when they were shooting their show. And I was like, this is awesome. So even for people in the food world, like, I love giving them an outlet to be funny rather than earnest. Like, that's, just like we were saying, we hate hunting content that has an agenda. I hate food content that's way too precious. And so much of it is now. And chefs are rock stars, and like all these people, it's like they take themselves so goddamn seriously that I like to give them a place where they don't have to take themselves seriously. And I think they enjoy it too. I think, the one weird episode I had was with an idol of mine, Ruth Reichel, who's like grande dame of food writing. And I feel like she had I kept trying to make it funny, but she just like couldn't go there. And it kind of stayed serious. I mean, it's a great episode, but it was like,
it is very good.
It was definitely like me trying to make it funny, but she was just like, I'm not used to making this stuff funny. Yeah, I mean, that is like my biggest passion project is the podcast.
I think food, like when you talk about food, like you said, it's something we can all relate to. So when you're kind of teasing Padma about like her addiction to tamarind and like stuff like that, it was like kind of fun because, it's something that easily to relate to, where other podcasts, it's probably a little bit more of a labor. Do you think it's easier in that regard?
I mean, again, that's the only thing that I have, like, to relate with people is food. It's the only thing I have that I know that I can go toe to toe with literally anyone. I don't care how big or small they're. It's one of the positive byproducts of my foodie addiction, right? Is that I've been to all the best restaurants in the world. So if someone wants to talk highbrow, I can talk highbrow. I've hunted most of the animals that you can hunt in America. So if someone wants to go lowbrow, I can go lowbrow. I'm pretty confident in being able to have a fun conversation with anyone about food. So it's just me just trying to make money off of it.
All right. Now I'm going to turn the tables on you, Dan. I'm going to ask you the same questions that you ask your guests on Green Eggs and Dan. The first one is, what is your first good food memory?
So my earliest food memory is, and this is actually in the book, but it was a falafel sandwich in Israel when I think I was probably around 5 years old. It was such an interesting new flavor. The yeasty doughiness of the bread on the outside, that tangy amba, which is like a mango sauce, the nutty tahini, and then these crispy, crunchy, like violently crunchy on the outside falafel balls with a pillowy, doughy inside. I just remember it like blowing my brain up. So that's probably my earliest food memory.
All right, next question. What is your least favorite food memory?
My least favorite food memory. Ooh.
I almost want to like harken back to the duck, maybe.
Yeah, probably the duck. I think killing the duck. So killing it was definitely one of the worst things I've ever done in my life because it didn't die and my buddy had to like, twist its neck. It was gross. And I just couldn't really stomach the food either. I'd say, there was a girl I dated who was Jewish and kosher, and this is not in the book, but I was just like, this is not going to work out because I can't have a kosher kitchen. I just can't do it. And I was like, I think we should break up. And it was over the phone. And then I got home and she had a key to my place. And I got home and she was in there with a big plate of prosciutto. And I was like, is this what you want? Is this what you want? She took a bite of it. And I was like, oh my God, no, don't do this. What are you doing? So I think that was the worst food memory I've ever had. Just besmirching prosciutto. Like someone just spite eating prosciutto in front of me was probably my worst food memory.
Okay, let's say next question. Let's say you're on death row. The reason is, let's say you were at a book signing and somebody thought you were another comedian, like let's say a BJ Novak. What would you want for your last meal on death row?
So this changes all the time. Like it depends when you're asking me. But I'd say I'm gonna go with the crowd, which is I've asked hundreds of people what their death row meal is, and the one that comes up most often is a steakhouse steak. There's nothing more satisfying to me than just a ribeye with some cream spinach, some type of French fry situation. I think I would go out with that and a nice glass of old Brunello. That's all I need. And a key lime pie at the end, because key lime pie was like another earliest food memory that I remember having in Florida with my family, and I just loved it. So I could see myself going out on that.
Nice, I like that. So if you were stranded on a desert island and you could only have one thing every day, what would you pick for the meal that you would have every day on the desert island?
Pizza. I know it's basic, but it's true. When has anyone ever gotten tired of pizza? When has anyone said, oh, no, I'm not in the mood for pizza? It's fucking pizza. It's the best. I can have it for breakfast. I can have it for lunch. I can have it for dinner. I love having it. It's a perfect breakfast food. Like I think it's very overlooked as a breakfast food, right? Because it's bread. Because we'll have those things in other iterations. You'll have bread and cheese for breakfast, but warm it up. Add some tomato. Why not? Why the hell are we not having pizza for breakfast on the regular and then put an egg on top of it? Game over. So I think pizza for me is my most versatile desert island food.
Nice. What's the best low-end meal you've ever had?
The best low-end meal that I've ever had. You would think that I have all these questions, like the answers ready to go, because I ask them like every single day.
It's easier to ask them to answer them, I think.
Yeah, it is. It's just like there's so many of them. Best low-end meal I've ever had. There was a taco place downtown Los Angeles La Reina, it was called. And it was this old grandma who sat outside making tacos al pastor. And there were those small tacos, you know, like the little tiny ones that you can have like 4 or 5 of them. And it was just the most succulent pork that was just like crisp on the outside from the spit, and a little sliver of pineapple on the top of it, and just an amazing salsa. I mean, I could sit there and eat like 10 of these things, and they were like 25 cents each. I mean, they were just killer. So tacos La Reina. Yeah.
What's the best high-end meal you've ever had? And I imagine that's probably the hardest question for you, right? Because
it's the easiest one. I know exactly what it is. It was a meal that I had at Blue Hill at Stone Barns, which is a restaurant in upstate New York. Dan Barber is the chef. It's like on a farm, and you're eating all the food that they grow on the farm. I know a lot of people do that now, but this was before farm to table was the thing.
Yeah.
Sorry. We can cut out that burp. I was just burping. That's how excited I'm getting about this restaurant. And I went with a buddy of mine at the time. We're no longer friends, but he was a sommelier in Manhattan. And so they were trying to poach him to come out to this restaurant. And they just pulled out all the stops. And we were there for 4 hours. And it was just hit after hit after hit after hit. And then they brought us into the kitchen and brought us around the farm. And we could see the animals we just ate. And it was just a perfect experience.
That sounds nice.
Yeah.
What is your biggest pet peeve regarding service in restaurants?
Again, a ever evolving question. I always love to pick up new pet peeves. My newest one, though, that I'm sticking with now is the QR code at restaurants.
Oh my God. I hate that. I really fucking hate that.
I am hoping that this is not something that sticks. This should have just been a COVID thing, and that is it. I think it needs to die a fiery death. I think that etiquette-wise, etiquette is a lost art, especially in restaurants. And for starters, I hate having phones on the table at dinner. You know, lunch, fine. It's work hours. I get it. Dinner, that phone should be away. It should be in your pocket. It should be in the car. It should be on silent. It should not be vibrating. And so I think that the QR code thing forces you to bring that stupid phone out. And it kind of it ruins the vibe. It ruins the mood. I hate scrolling on it. I just hate everything about that. I hope that dies quickly. Another new pet peeve that I'm workshopping is that I hate when a server is telling me about the specials, but then doesn't tell me what the prices are of the specials. And the reason why that's an awful pet peeve is because nobody does that. Like, no one will tell you the prices. And I never knew I had it as a pet peeve until I went to Balthazar in New York City, which is arguably the best service that you can get at a restaurant, is one of Keith McNally's restaurants. And the servers at this very upscale restaurant would be like, you know, our special, we have a branzino that is, you know, $18 or whatever. And they give you the price. And I was like, yeah, why doesn't everyone give us the price? Why does everyone make us hope for the best when we order the special? You know?
Good question.
Which brings me to my third pet peeve, branzino. I've had enough of goddamn branzinos on the menu. Everyone's got a branzino, and the prices of branzino are outpacing the S&P 500 by 10x. There is a restaurant in New York, I'm going to put it on blast, called Laser Wolf, that is charging $125 for a fucking branzino. Dean, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on your podcast. I probably should have asked you before, but I'm getting very impassioned right now. Okay. Branzino shouldn't be over $30. Okay. No. You can go get a branzino at any fish place. It's going to be cheap, and it's so easy to cook. It's very forgiving. You can't overcook a freaking branzino. Get the branzino, go home, make it yourself. Do not let Big Branzino make all of us bankrupt.
I'm going to get a bumper sticker. Fuck Branzino.
Fuck Branzino. Enough with the branzino. I want to make a t-shirt that says enough with the branzino.
Dan, Cobra Kai is going to be out in its last season, and your book is out. What's next for you?
That is a great question, and in fact, it's a question that I've been pondering as of late. I try to develop a TV show every year, so I'm gonna keep trying to do that, preferably based off of chapters in the book. I am gonna try to write another book. I have a pitch ready to go, so hopefully someone will take a chance on that. And I don't know. I mean, I actually don't know, which I love. I love being in that place of like, what's going to be next, because it always kind of works out, because my philosophy in my career is that I'm addicted to silver linings. So I will constantly try to find something positive and something that can lead to something else within my career, within whatever I try. Even if it fails, something good will come out of it. And once this writer's strike is over, I have a couple projects that were already in the works that were put on pause. So, I'll be fine. I'll be okay.
I have no doubt, and I really do hope you put out another book. I really would love to see what else you have to say. And I'm going to put links to the book and the podcast in the bio.
Of course. Thanks for having me. This was one of the best podcasts that I've done, regarding the book or regarding my career or anything. So you have a gift as well, Dean.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. And I really thank you for being on the podcast today. I know you had a...
That was my conversation with Dan Ahdoot. You can listen to his podcast, Green Eggs and Dan, on all major platforms. And you can get his book, Undercooked, How I Let Food Become My Life Navigator, and How Maybe That's a Dumb Way to Live, through all major distributors and at all better bookstores. Next week, I will have Polly Talbot from A La Carte Culinary Services on the program. She also does Chowlingo Culinary School online on the program as well. Until then, see you at the library.